we have to account now for the 30-some years of people who have suffered or died to suicides or other mental health ailments that could have actually been helped with these medications that we actually knew were effective. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's John Davis with 360 Health. This is Living 360.
Hi, I'm Chris Neal, and I'm really, really excited about today's topic.
You look like a little kid.
I know, dude. I love this one. Yeah. This is neuroplasticity.
This is neuroplasticity. This is going to be a really, really cool episode. It's going to be a little bit of a geek out, but this episode we're going to dive into the very sought out, very discussed, new aged mental breakthrough in science, which is neuroplasticity and the medical tools that we have available to increase neuroplasticity, as well as, you know, all of the science around neuroplasticity and what it is.
But first, we got to back up. We got to back up because that's a big word. Neuroplasticity. What does it mean? It's kind of a new term out there. Well, it has to do with the brain, right? So that's the neuro part. So basically, what neuroplasticity is, it's the ability to reform and reshape thought processes and ways that we learn, the ways we do things, the way we perceive things, anything having to do with the brain modifying itself and learning as we go along. That's basically what neuroplasticity is. So everything we talk about in Living 360, it's all about life performance. So this has to do with the performance of the brain. How do we tune up our brain and get it to be more effective and more useful for us?
Awesome. I love it. So neuroplasticity, it's an interesting word. It's kind of become more popular recently because psychedelic therapies have been a big breakthrough in the last couple of years.
Huge breakthrough for neuroplasticity. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where this word has sort of become more known because, you know, we've got ketamine clinics popping up everywhere. We're actually launching our own ketamine clinic. We already do ketamine therapy. And as a result, people are sort of asking, okay, well, how does this work? Because what has prompted all of this curiosity comes a lot from, you know, people revisiting things like psilocybin, mushrooms, and all of these different psychedelics that we kind of had demonized at one point in our history. And so now we're realizing that these things are actually medicinal. And so that kind of led to the discovery or the maybe rediscovery of this word neuroplasticity, which talks about molding and sort of the silly puttiness of the brain.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, exactly. And in order to go through that, we need to start with, well, let's kind of catch everybody up with like, what do we know about the brain so far? What has science taught us about the brain? Yeah,
nothing.
Very, very little. I actually did like a little 3-minute historical walkthrough, like a chronological walkthrough, and it's going to be up on the YouTube channel somewhere. But for my serious geeks out there, like it's fascinating how little we know about the brain. But we do know this: the brain weighs about 3 pounds. Okay, and even though it's such a small percentage of our overall weight, the brain actually utilizes about 20 to 25% of our metabolism, of our calories and energy.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know you were going that direction. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's a lot for something that only weighs 3 pounds. Okay. That's a lot of metabolic activity that's going on in there. So it's interesting. And then now you hear people say things like, oh, we only use 10% of our brain, you know? And in reality, that, like, just to kind of dispel the myth, in reality, we don't. The brain doesn't really work like that. We don't have, well, in most people, we don't have just blank sections of our brain that just do not light up or function. In most of us,
it's not like linear where it's like you're just using this corner.
Yeah.
Everything else is just offline.
So like they were able to do some tests and they found, like, you know, people that were they tested brain activity in people that were doing like complex puzzles and stuff, and it got all the way up to like 65% of utilization. But basically throughout the whole day, you're going to use most all of your brain just going through, you know, all of the feels, all the emotions, all the activities of just a regular day. But is that being utilized effectively or to its maximum effectiveness? That's a different question that honestly right now real science can't really, you know, answer that, right. You know. But we're always pushing for performance and pushing for the next level. So
it's fascinating. Like I think it's really funny because there's that concept and you've said this to me, but I didn't know in statistics that there was like an actual metabolic energy quotient with the brain as far as how many calories, because you feel like when you go through really intense periods of like heavy processing and heavy emotional trauma or heavy thoughts or whatever, you know, when we were building the company, and it's like, God, I'm really, really tired and also really, really hungry.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's the brain.
And I didn't even make it to the gym today.
Do anything.
You know,
so spent. I didn't know the brain is over here on the treadmill. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's neat. So let's dive into, we talked a little bit about the definition. Let's talk about brain performance a little bit. Okay. So what are some examples that you found like through life of like, brain performance? Like, what does that mean? I mean, we understand brain, like other types of performance, like I want to be able to run a 5K faster. I want to be able to bench press, whatever, but when it comes to our brain, like how would you quantify that, or how would you like look at that?
Well, it's weird. Like, I think that brain performance, like I think about that movie Limitless. I don't know if you know.
Yes.
I love that movie. So I've always had this fascination with like, how do you hack into that? And that it's funny that you brought up the 10% thing, because I was going to say there's that thing that like it starts when you're a kid and all the, kids find little facts, and that 10% thing is like, I remember that from the playground where like kids are like, you only like use 10% of your brain, and if you're like superheroes, they use like 90%. They can float and they can do all this stuff. And you really think that there's all these untapped places, and then you realize that it actually has to do with functionality. And so for me, performance is something that I got more interested in as an adult, as a young adult, which came from a desire to just be able to have clarity, to have that really solid memory. Like I had a few different defining factors. There was like being able to retain information really quickly, read, scan, and retain information, be really, really socially agile, which is a funny one. But I think as we get older, we start to recognize there's a lot of value to being able to read, interpret social dynamics and interactions, and quickly assess situations so that you can be flexible, mold.
In an appropriate conversation.
Have appropriate and engage with a wide range of people, which comes from being able to assess and document and recognize different types of personalities and different types of people. And then for me, it's also just being able to settle when you need to. So for me, brain performance is really having a control over the mind. And I think we go through periods where we have more and less, there's a real chapter in my life where I remember being able to be super, super active throughout the day and focused and push. And then 7 p.m. would come and I'd start to wind down, and then I would read every night for like an hour. And it was like, now I'm so fried all the time, like that much structure. It's like, whew, no. But like at that point, I remember thinking, God, my brain feels so clean, so clean. I can, now if I can get 7 minutes of a book, I'm like, oh God, I need to go look at Twitter or something. I can't do it. This book ain't doing it.
That's great. Actually, what started a little before the neuroplasticity wave was nootropics. Nootropics, for all of you guys that don't know what nootropics are, it's basically a whole series of supplements and medications that have to do with brain performance and being able to create more agility in your brain, like what you were describing, and some of them are more for relaxation, relaxing of the brain. Caffeine is probably one of the oldest nootropics out there, as a stimulant, to get our brain lit up a little bit more. So there's a lot of different ways that we can actually put our hands in and control things rather than just kind of live with it.
Well, you fertilize you fertilize the brain. There's like tyrosine. I went through a whole nootropic phase. I remember when they blew up like 10 years ago.
Probably not even that much. 10
10 years ago is when they really, because modafinil and
that's probably the king. Modafinil they consider it the king of nootropics.
Modafinil is a stimulant medication, but it's a little bit different than Ritalin or Adderall, amphetamine.
It's like a clean Adderall. But works really well. But so let's dig into let's dig a little bit more into the brain and what this all means. So in order to really understand that, we have to here's the geek out part. So put your hats on.
I love it. You like down. This is serious.
This I love this part. So
no joke. This is geek out time.
You can't, if you don't learn anything, learn that. No, I'm just kidding. So the best way to describe really how neuroplasticity works is to start with the anatomy of the brain. Okay, so basically the brain and everything that makes up what the brain does. So that's our memories from who knows how long ago. Like how do we remember, or how did we learn how to read or to speak, or what color is blue, and all of those things, and how to drive, and how do we respond to things. Each and every cognitive thought process is made up of the communication of one neuron to another neuron. And this complex network of neurons talking with one another, because one neuron can talk to many, many different neurons, so the way that they all communicate and talk with one another is what establishes our memories, our standard operating procedures in our brain, like how we think about things and so forth. And the way that these neurons communicate is they don't touch. They almost touch, but not quite. And one will send neurotransmitters. It's basically a chemical outside of one cell into another cell. Now, there's different types of neurotransmitters too, depending on the process and the type of memory that it's trying to establish. So that's how they communicate. Now, where more of the most advantageous parts of neuroplasticity comes in is going into that part of the anatomy, like really working to break that up. Because the opposite of neuroplasticity is neurorigidity. So everybody's heard the saying, like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
Right? So kind of like that, like your brain does get rigid in a certain way of certain types of processes. And you had a really cool way of describing like how the brain uses efficiency to come up with ways of doing things, like its standard operating procedures.
Well, the brain is like a super efficient machine. It's a efficiency machine first and foremost. So the way that it stores information is different than how we would kind of interpret. We kind of think we walk through life and the brain is just like recording, like a video, just recording everything that's happening and all this data. And if it did that, we'd have no memory, which is a weird way to think of things, that we actually do have a set amount of memory in our brain that we can use and we can max out. And so we would never be close to that because that's not how the brain does things. What it does is it archives information and stores that information in prior reference data. And then it uses that reference data based on different experiences to basically say, I think this is what this is. And it does this not only with how we think about events and people, that's how we store data about social interaction, how we store data about our relationships and how we interact with each other, but it's also how we store data about what our sensory perceptions are. So like we start to learn as kids, like what a book is, what a table is, what all these things are, and they enter through our different senses, our touch, our scent, our smell. And basically, the brain doesn't look at it like we think. It collects the information through the optic. There we go. The optic nerve. Yeah. There we go. It collects information through there. It collects information through touch. It collects information through sound and scent. And then it says, I think what I'm interacting with is this. And then it takes all that data and redraws a picture.
Like a thumbnail.
Yeah, like a thumbnail of what's in front of you. But it's not actually just perceiving it and recording it. And it's funny, and we'll get into this later in the episode, but all of that data is stored in different sections of the brain that are then organized. And so one of the fascinating things with psychedelics, which we'll kind of jump into later, is that they actually cause the part of the brain that organizes all that data to shut down, which is why people start to see weird things or taste scent, which is called synesthesia. They'll sort of have these weird interactions between the brain because the part that's actually taking that data and putting it together is not there. So it's like a bunch of different instruments.
And that's just temporary while the psychedelics are doing their work.
Yeah, while they're there, they're shutting down the conductor of your orchestra.
Yeah.
And the conductor is telling the cellist and the violinist and the pianist and the bassoon and all, this is when you do this, and the conductor's gone and they're having a field day. They're wiling out.
Yeah.
So,
but that goes into the whole rigidity thing. You know, when if there's too much structure, then you end up with brain inefficiency.
Right.
Or, and that's a very light way to say it, like PTSD.
Yeah.
The same type of thing. Your brain is very, very rigid at thinking every situation having to do with, such and such is going to happen just like it did, before.
Well, think about it. The brain is since it stores priors for reference to avoid having to constantly learn in a new way, because it's more efficient. If you have one experience, whether it's good or bad, it's usually going to archive as much of that data into one prior that it can reference, which is why as we get older, you hear this, like people are like, oh, I know people. She's just like 1,000 other people like that.
Yeah.
And they have a very clear judgment and they know exactly what this is, whether or not it's even the case. But there's a series of different events or things that any situation can elicit, and that person will have whatever their prior reference point is. And so to get you to break out of that, that's the neuroplasticity part, is to get you to get out of the place where the brain is immediately taking you back to a reference that may not be beneficial to your mental health and to your mental performance.
That's awesome. See, I love the way you describe that. I have an example that I want to throw out there that I've used with my patients that I think makes really a lot of sense in understanding what neuroplasticity is. So, and we can pretty much all identify with this. Let's say you get into a car accident driving over a bridge, years and years ago. For decades after that, every time you drive over a bridge, your palms get sweaty. You start to get nervous. Your heart's racing. You're like, oh my God. And your body has this fight or flight response. Like in medicine, we call it a feeling of impending doom. When you just know something really bad's going to happen, and that obviously comes from your brain. But so how that's broken down anatomically is that those neurons that we were talking about, how they communicate with one another in the case of a traumatic event, bad, harmful, you got hurt, your body is basically trying to store things in a way that it can be used as protective information moving forward for the rest of your life. It's trying to protect you.
Right.
But what happens is that, sometimes our bodies can go overboard and it gets in the way, and causes more of a problem, like in the case of PTSD, for example. So going back to the bridge, when the accident occurs, the neurotransmitter that's used in that situation, in those traumatic events, is usually glutamate. And when there's a flood, a big rush of glutamate that goes from one neurotransmitter to another to make that connection and form that memory, it actually elicits a response where those two neurons draw closer and almost lock in together, very, very close. So that pathway, that thought process is only going to go one way every time. And your friend sitting next to you in the car might say, well, what's the big deal? It's just the bridge. You drive over this bridge all the time. Like, why are you so nervous? Like, it's everybody's driving over. I know you got in an accident, but whatever. And you like literally cannot get your brain to think that way because it's locked in, it's rigid to only think along that one pathway. So where neuroplasticity comes in, neuroplasticity is the therapy is either in forms of, there's non-medicinal sources or ways to do it, but there's also medicinal sources that we're going to get into that there's been a lot of really, really cool research on that's very safe. That one of them in particular, ketamine, one of them will goes specifically to the glutamate neurotransmitter and blocks that. So prevents that from creating that long-standing bond between those two neurotransmitters, and they can spread apart a little bit. So now you still have the same memory, you still have the same thought, the same background of memory, but when you drive over a bridge the next time, you can think of it in a more open way. You're not rigid anymore. It's like, you know what? Okay, it's just a bridge. Yeah. Like thousands of people go over this bridge all the time. I remember I got in an accident, but it's still just a bridge, and I'm okay. And you don't have that overwhelming, response that you can't reel back in.
Yeah, I love the way that you said that, because I think we all can relate. It's funny. Like I just went through something really intense and really traumatic that was, something that people go through a lot, which is fraud. But what's fascinating is that because of the way it happened, I got to live real time the brain forming those bonds, because I started, every time my phone would buzz, I started worrying that it was like a two-party
spam alert or
authentication, somebody trying to, and so you see how the brain immediately, before I barely even touched my phone, and now it buzzes, and I look without a doubt every time, even in the middle of the night. And you can see where it's like, it's not necessarily a rational behavior, but it's a emotionally charged behavior that a memory is being formed and a protective bond is being formed. And I think what's interesting about that is that when you watch it happen real time, and you actually are aware of it happening real time, you still do have an option to kind of say, okay, let me shift this. It's weird. The brain does build these things real time, but we tend to not be very aware of it. And the longer it has to reinforce that bond, the harder it is to break through it.
Yes.
In the moment you can start to actively, that's one of the things we'll talk about, which is mindfulness, but you can actively start to disassociate yourself from the event. Because that's typically what we do. We make it a personal thing where it's like, this is a personal thing to me. And so as a result, I'm building this protective mechanism so that I'm aware of how this is life coming for me, so that I can see these signs in the future and I'll know that life is, coming after me, as opposed to just the randomness of life. And being able to accept that randomness allows you to help separate yourself from traumatic events instead of store them in your body and have these really tight bonds that you got to figure out how to untangle. But if you're anything like the rest of America and the planet, you have a few of these bonds. And so don't worry, there is help.
That's right. That's right. Neuroplasticity therapies is our next section. So
there is a light.
Yes. several lights actually. And now just in the past, 10 years, we have a lot more science and a lot more control over what we can do to get our brain to function, more optimally. Yeah. So I'm so excited.
Well, it's also funny because if you think about it, even though the brain is an efficiency machine, we are still in a weird period historically, because we are animals. So our bodies and our brains are designed to function like an animal, to protect us from harm, to tell us when to, our fight or flight response. But we're not actually usually running from people with guns or trying to hunt or getting chased by lions. Most of the time, we're just getting emails from work that stress us out, and they trigger these massive floods of chemistry in our body that were designed to kind of keep us safe from lions chasing us.
Exactly.
And so I think it's really fascinating because we look at it now and we realize, okay, there's a real need, which is why this stuff has become more focused on recently, but there's been a resurgence in the importance, which makes sense because mental health is resurfaced, in the last, I don't know if I could say resurfaced. I don't think it ever had an era. It might have.
Well, it's being talked about finally
70s,
more openly.
The love period, the 70s, that was
even then, there was still a lot of stigma behind it.
Yeah. So it makes sense that people would be looking more seriously at what are the tools that we have, because, you don't get a gold star for just suffering for no reason. If there's a way to hack it, hack it. Definitely. That is our belief system.
Absolutely.
That is the motto of Living 360. If you can hack it, hack it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about the first and oldest and type of therapy out there, non-medicinal therapy.
Talk therapy?
So basically cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. So I'm gonna read out the definition of cognitive behavioral therapy straight from the American Psychiatric Association, and I want you to tell me how closely that sounds to everything we've just been talking about with neuroplasticity. Right? Okay. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, helps people identify and change thinking and behavior patterns that are unhealthy or ineffective, replacing them with more accurate thoughts and functional behaviors.
That's pretty much the exact definition of what neuroplasticity is.
But how long? Let's say for example, the car accident thing. Like the car accident driving over a bridge. How long do you think? I wasn't able to really find this online anywhere, but most people have an idea that when you start getting into therapy, nothing against it because it's great. It works really well for a lot of people. How long do you think it would take to overcome that with cognitive behavioral therapy?
I'm gonna ask a question to answer the question because I'm curious about this. I don't think you know unless you've had an experience, but have you ever had an experience where you had something just unlock? Something that you've struggled with for potentially your whole life or for as long as you can remember, and then all of a sudden it just sort of unlocks. And you're like, oh, like it smacks you in the face and then it's gone. It's really just gone. Have you ever had that?
I haven't had any. I've had small episodes of that. Some of them I've been able to cognitively process through, and when I got to that place, logically, That's it.
Yeah.
The switch is flipped. And then I had a ketamine episode that did help.
So I just asked because I had one of those last night that was really weird. It went way back in time. We'll explore that. But as far as for CBT, I've actually done CBT. I did cognitive behavioral therapy, and I think it's a really, really useful tool. I think it's a really difficult tool, and I think it takes a lot of time because you have to unpack so much to understand all of the triggers to begin with, and then go through one by one and reprogram those triggers. Mm-hmm. And so, we don't have a few triggers. I mean, I think a lot of us would like to think we don't, but we have a million different things that we have formed prior data about, that we have prior judgments about, that some serve us, most, or I wouldn't say most don't, but it's kind of a coin toss. We don't know what % of the things we store are actually impeding our performance and helping it. And when we start to find some of the big things that we just know, it's like, oh God, this has always been heavy. I can't hold a relationship. I can't hold a job, or whatever it is. The time it takes to unprogram that, some people spend lifetimes.
And I think if you go back to the anatomy of it, like I think that that protective mechanism doesn't exist completely in the conscious mind. It's more subconscious, So, and it's your body's protective mechanism. So your body subconsciously, innately believes that this is a good thing.
You're fighting against that. So you're fighting against your body's storage unit.
You basically have to talk your brain out of it being a good thing, in order to restructure the neurons, the neural pathways. It's possible, but it takes a lot, to be able to talk coming from your conscious brain into your subconscious brain to get it to restructure something that's built out of concrete.
Well, and I think it's also like the stuff that impedes our performance and our happiness is always emotionally charged. Mm-hmm. It's always got an emotional trigger. So remember, this concrete was cemented with a heavy emotion.
Yeah.
So you trying to logic your way around something that the body has said, no, I have emotional data behind this that supports why I created this incredibly firm wall.
Fear, which is a very powerful emotion.
Yeah. Fear, anxiety, mixed with actual stored data of an experience, whether it's an abuse or a really negative experience. Like all of those things are stored. And so to answer the question about how long do I think that takes, I think some things it's probably like you can do it over the course of like a year or two, depending if they're little things. I think therapy is really good at helping you kind of have a broad approach of like, hey, we're not gonna necessarily say let's take on the mountain, we're gonna eat the elephant one bite at a time. But I think the things that impede our happiness the most, that can take literally a full lifetime, and it can take a huge chunk. I've had friends and I've had even family members who they got functional after like 20 years of therapy, and they got progressively better, but I don't think any of them would describe themselves as disassociated from whatever the event or the thing that caused whatever is the hardship. They just have gotten to a place where they can still move. But there's a difference, and I think especially with what we talk about and how we approach life, there's a difference between getting through life and thriving in performance.
Oh, absolutely.
And
that's
so
the
it's
whole point. Yeah.
We want you to be able to get past an event so that you can thrive, not just survive the event and get through the day.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think, going back to what you were saying earlier, one of the great things about CBT, as you're going through it, even if you're trying to work through an old traumatic event, you're actually building tools and a repertoire of things to do the next time something happens. Yeah. So if you're able to process it in real time, like you were talking about earlier, then you're much, much less likely to be hindered by it, by whatever the event was,
I think
I like CBT, and I think really the best answer, and we're going to get to this. Well, I'm skipping ahead. We're going to get to this later, but the most ideal way to go about neuroplasticity and brain performance is a mixture of many things. Many things all at once.
We call it the Holy Trinity.
That's it. Yeah.
But I think, for me, one of the things that before we jump into the psychedelic side, CBT and any form of therapy. There's is it Freud who does the childhood? Is that Freud? Yeah. Mixing therapies and mixing explorative methods are really wise, like there's benefits to focusing on the tool-based thinking. There's benefits to doing some exploration of your past to understand why things are the way that they are, and using those tools to try to help disassociate the personal side of that, because I do think we make things personal a lot, and that's why they get stored. But one of the things that I saw in my life was meditation made a really big difference. I've always said it's like a breath. It's like over time, and it worked for me much quicker than therapy ever did, because what it did, even though it didn't allow me necessarily to process all of the things that had happened, it did allow me to stop adding to the pile. You know, it gave me a breath before a reaction.
Yeah.
And that I did TM. I did transcendental meditation for like 3-4 years. I don't really do it as much anymore, but it's one of the most difficult periods of my life. And the weird thing is I don't remember it being particularly tough. I remember being able to, it created space, and it allowed me to go through a really challenging period without it being about me. Yeah. And so it didn't, I don't really have a lot of triggers from that time in my life. I don't have things, even though there's a lot of difficult things, I don't have a lot of stuff that I can't do that normally would have been glued down during that chapter. So
that's really interesting. The one of the things about meditation, I think, and I'm a car guy, so I kind of, everything kind of goes through my mind in the filter of a car. But I kind of see meditation kind of like the reason why I feel like it works so well is because you have to basically shut down life for a moment. So it's kind of like putting your car up on a car lift. It's like, you're not going anywhere right now.
I love that.
And you're not going anywhere. You're right here. And everything's going to be okay. And if you're up there after a second, you're like, okay, all right, okay, I'll let you work on it now. And but if you're driving around and spinning and you're thinking, your brain is going about all kinds of stuff, and you never have time to actually stop and look at things and look at the engine and see what needs help.
It's funny, like I still meditate. I don't do, like I said, I don't do TM anymore, just because I don't, but I do a smaller version. I do like a little 11-minute thing, and it's really funny because you can see the physical side when you're really overstimulated. When you sit down and you close your eyes twitch. And it's like, it's very difficult for about the first 2 to 3 minutes. And you realize there's a real, you feel the electricity in your body. You feel the adrenaline, the stimulation. And to sit, then you slowly start to feel your body slow down. And when you start to notice that, I think, this is obviously not an episode about meditation, but I think there's something important to say for that, because it's become a very abstract thing, and people are starting to realize there's a science there. It's not just sort of like a spiritual practice. It's really, there's a science behind how it slows your body down, and you can actually observe that science,
and train your body to do that. That's the Flowly system.
Yeah. There's there's really cool VR sets and things that actually show you. But for me, it was fascinating because I really notice it when I'm really anxious. And it's usually when I won't do it. That's when I force myself to do it, because I'm like, you need to stop for a second. You need to go on, I guess, the pulley or the lift or whatever it's called.
Car lift.
It's Uber.
Yeah. The car lift.
Okay. You got to get on the car jack. But anyways.
No, it's the lift.
Only took 4. But yeah, like you get in it and you're like, okay, you gotta take a step back. And when I sit, I'm like, whoa, I can feel it. Like my eyes will be twitchy, and then it takes like 5 minutes, and then by the end, you can sit, and that's when you realize, okay, there's something here. There's something here to look at.
Awesome. Well, that's all. So all of those things with non-medicinal therapies, they're all great things that you can do. You can do from home. They're, the CBT actually, after the pandemic, like there was a huge wave of telemedicine therapists, that will meet with you, which is very effective too. There's a lot of great resources for that. But let's
do self-taught CBT too. There's a lot of applications that will help you teach yourself, because they're self-administered tools. Excuse me, they're self-administered tools. But yeah, I think
and books too.
Yeah, and post-COVID, we all need something.
Yeah,
we all need a little period on the lift.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I could do like self CBT to myself, because I repress everything, so if I'm like, I just imagine myself talking to myself in a mirror. It's like, come on, there's more to it than that.
See, I'm so difficult.
No.
I'm so challenging.
I don't have anything else to say.
I'm done, even with myself. Well, I had to do
time up?
I had to do my own because I'm such a by nature difficult person when it comes to certain types of positions that whenever I would see a therapist, I would do I would mentally spar with them. I'd really, and it wasn't intentional, but it would be like, I'm going to test you. Let's make sure that you've got what it takes to get this horse under control. Let's see if you've got what it takes to deal with this crazy brain. and so eventually I was like, well, this is expensive for this person to be like, oh, here he goes again. It's like, so let's throw this one at you. It's like, you've wasted another hour.
That's funny. See, I'm the hypothetical guy. So hypothetically, I have a friend that's having this issue. Where
see, I'm the one who's like, so I have X, 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 Y, and Z, and how would you treat that?
Oh boy.
And they're like, well, let's start with the questionnaire. Yeah. I read the questionnaire and I had some concerns about its authenticity. They're like,
I hate that.
So eventually, I just got worn out by myself and was like, okay, if I've decided I'm the only one strong enough to deal with this crazy brain, then I got to teach myself. And there was a wider range of resources that will say, okay, this is how you do it. And you set up the goals, and it teaches you how to look at things and think about things differently. And that worked well for me because sparring against yourself only.
Yeah, and they have workbooks. They have workbooks and stuff, and the way my mind works, I'm like, I want to make an A.
Yeah.
Do the workbook so I look like a perfect person.
I think that's normal, though. I think a lot of it's like, I won therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
10 points for me.
It's not supposed to be. We're joking, but it's not supposed to be like that at all. You don't actually benefit anything from any of those. Do as we say, not as we do.
Yes.
So let's jump into some of the actual medicinal tools for neuroplasticity. Ketamine is one of my favorites.
Yeah. So we have a ketamine clinic. We do ketamine therapy already with 360 Health, but we're launching our official 360 Mind clinic in about 2 months, which is going to start with ketamine therapy. But because this industry is expanding so quickly, it's going to be ultimately a house of all sorts of psychedelic therapies. MDMA has FDA breakthrough status. Psilocybin will likely be legalized. There's already places in the U.S. that are doing psilocybin-assisted therapies. So I think this is kind of one of the craziest, coolest, wildest spots that it comes to when we're looking at how we approach mental wellness. Because as someone who's been a nootropic biohacker for such a long period, it's wild to see that there's actually stuff out there that will let you make 10 years of progress in 3 months, which I hate saying
or less,
because it sounds like a sales pitch. Like, how would you like to make 10 years of emotional progress in 10 sessions? It sounds, but it's wild.
It really is wild, and we have so many anecdotal examples of that. And you can search for it online too. But there's really a lot of power to it. And again, if you understand the anatomy of it and the mechanics behind it, it actually makes sense. Yeah. Ketamine is one of the medications that does it. It is designated as an anesthesia medication. Actually, it's used in practically every single operating room all over the country. With almost every single surgery, as a part of the anesthesia cocktail to help people put people to sleep. Now, in other doses, in smaller doses, it can be used to go in as a disassociative anesthetic, so to go in and disassociate the neurotransmitters, creating that connection. That's precisely what it does, just for glutamate. And glutamate happens to be the neurotransmitter that sends the signal for the most traumatic events in your life. Yeah. Period. So it just makes logical sense. So when I have a patient that says they go under ketamine therapy, the therapy session itself lasts, it's usually pretty predictable, between 45 minutes and an hour and 10 minutes or so for the at-home therapy. And everything gets unlocked the next morning. You know, you're up and you go around. And prior to that, like the patient was deathly afraid of snakes.
Yeah.
You know, and this is actually a real story. Like they were deathly afraid of, I mean, to the point where a toy snake, anything, it would ruin the whole day, like, you know, crying and like, you know, quite a bit of an episode. You know, so now, like within that one episode, that was unlocked. You can process things in a different way. And it's like, oh, you know what? Snakes really aren't that bad. They're actually kind of cool looking. You know, they're interesting. I want to know how they work. And it's gone. Like the whole emotional connection to it and the fear and all of that other stuff is just gone. And you can you know, I remember I used to be afraid of that stuff, but for some reason now I'm just not.
Yeah.
My brain just thinks about it in a different way. And it's very clean and it's very quick. You know, a lot of times it does happen in one session. Sometimes it takes, you know, 3 or 4 or 6.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's still in comparison to years of, you know, therapy and medication and all kinds of stuff that natural Western medicine puts us on quickly. Oh, you'd probably just need some more benzos, or you probably just need some SSRIs or whatever. Like, you know, this is actually a way to mechanically actually fix it.
It's a way to restructure the baseline. I mean, what we do with the brain is what we do with most things is we treat a chronic thing. You know, we treat the symptom. Yeah. So like SSRIs really treat the symptom. They don't necessarily, they don't have pretty much anything to do with how you're storing that information. They just make the symptoms of the depression lesser. And one of the biggest challenges is they actually just desensitize you all around. So your valleys are not nearly as deep, but your peaks are not as high either.
That means you're cured. It's fixed. Hey, you've done a great job.
I just won doctor.
Yeah, you might be a zombie, but you know, you're cured.
But what's interesting, so you know, they did brain imaging studies on psychedelic medications because you know there's 2 main systems, right? There's the glutamate system, and that's going to be ketamine. There's also amanita, muscimol, which people, you know, we're not going to
mushrooms.
Yeah, the Mario mushroom, Super Mario mushroom.
Yeah, the red mushroom with little white patches on it.
And I mean, we're not going to go into muscimol too much, but you will undoubtedly have seen it because it's kind of become the legal trip mushroom that you see. You know, you'll get ads. It's like trip legally and trip, you know, because muscimol is not considered it's not classified. There's not really any, there's not enough research into it for them to put it on any sort of schedule, but it works on the glutamate system as well. Then the other system is the serotonin system. And there's a specific neurotransmitter receptor that's called the 5-HT2A receptor. And that is the receptor that psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, I want to say DMT as well, all work on, is the 5-HT2A receptor. And so these are the 2 different systems that psychedelic medications work on. So they did imaging studies thinking, okay, you know, these things hit 2 completely different systems, but people are having a lot of similar responses, which is that they're having these sort of unlocks. And even though they work in different ways, you know, ketamine is not a hallucinogen. It's a dissociative. You might have some lucid dream state sort of aspects to a heavy or higher dose, therapeutic dose, but it's not a hallucinogen compared to like psilocybin, which is a hallucinogen. MDMA is kind of a hallucinogen, not as much, but you know, DMT is a hallucinogen, LSD is a hallucinogen. You know,
now explain to people what DMT is because a lot of people might not know.
So DMT is peyote, and I got to remember the chemical name. It's dimethyl.
It's okay. Don't hurt yourself.
Tryptamine, dimethyltryptamine. I think that's what it is.
I don't know. I have no idea.
I got to look it up. I think I probably butchered that.
Peyote. What country does peyote come from?
Peyote's the Indian. The Indian.
Is it North American? Like
it's not ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is. I got to remember the chemical.
But it's basically a plant.
It's a plant
from ancient times. That was
smoked.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was the the medicine man pipe, you know, smoke that would,
as opposed to
create,
ayahuasca, which is consumed as a tea or a drink, like a mud drink. It comes from vines and
or they would chew on the leaves,
on the bark.
you know. Yeah, so there's a lot of these medications have been around for a long time, and their benefits have been anecdotally noted, you know, through historical records, but we just never really paid attention to it. Oh, it's the, you know, whatever people are doing it. Like,
well,
but there's some great resources in there, and that ancient type of medicine that's way better in many cases than a lot of our medications, modern medicine today.
Well, they help us to. I think there's a recognition that we need to treat the underlying more than the chronic, the symptom, and then it kind of changed. You know, it's more profitable to have a chronic.
Watch that crazy talk now.
Well, it's much more. I mean, I hate to be this way, but it's a lot more profitable for you to be sick forever.
Yeah.
And me to be the medicine man for you forever than for me to help you get better, you know.
Check the windows. We're going to have like a Blue Cross Blue Shield sniper.
I know.
Like
Seriously. That's the end of living through 60. Shut it down.
I know.
But no,
you're in good hands now, aren't you?
But what's fascinating, and I know I sound like I should have a foil hat on, but what's crazy is that
he left it in the car.
They think that you would think that you would have all these different things happening and how they're working because they're on these different systems. And one is like, you know, you've got these things that are working with glutamate and they're, you know, sedatives and disassociatives, and this is more of a hallucinogen. You see colors and stuff. But what they found when they did imaging studies is that the brain on almost all of these different psychedelics looked the exact same.
Wow.
And that blew, that was a real scientific sort of whoa. Because they began research into this stuff, and then it got shut down and criminalized. And you know, there's massive disinformation campaigns, which is why it's only now becoming accessible. But you know, it's fascinating because they thought, okay, look, if you're seeing things, we think that you're going to see a lot of activity in the visual cortex, you know, because you're hallucinating. What they saw was it's actually everything just sort of shuts down, and there's this statement to turn down to turn on, which is really weird.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is like the brain shutting off. And that's really what they saw. Yeah. Which is that all of these...
I thought you were going to say turn down for what? That's what you were going to say.
I was going to.
I was waiting.
I realized I had to save it, so changed it. Nobody says that. But no,
my son says it. It's one of his favorite songs. He loves that song on the way to school.
Oh my God, he's gonna need ketamine therapy. So turn down for what? That's what they say. Yeah. But no, what they found was if the brain is inactive, like if it's shutting down, there's a section of the brain that's called the default mode network, and it is the most central functional part of how we store data and information.
It's like the hard drive.
It's the conductor of everything. The default mode network is the high conductor. It's the high priest of the brain. Okay. And no matter what the psychedelic, what they found was the default mode network goes offline.
Oh, that was the organizer.
That's the organizer. So the default mode network, which is made up of all these 5-HT2A receptors, glutamate receptors, which are all around the brain, it shuts down. And what happens is that we are then able to look at things in a different way. And there's a really cool chart, and if we can, we'll figure out a way to just kind of splat it up there on the screen, but it shows the neuron activity of a brain that's sort of just going through a regular day. And
the circle picture. Yeah, that one is really good. So it shows like each dot is like a different neuron, and the lines are how that neuron is connected to other neurons. And it's in a very organized, structured way.
Very efficient.
Very efficient way at first.
It's all proximal. It's like all the neurons are really connected right now, and the middle is just empty. And then you see when the default mode network goes offline, then one neuron way over here.
During psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, during psychedelic therapy, this neuron way over here can walk all the way across to this one and talk to this one.
Another. Yeah, and it's beautiful to see the whole thing like pan out. And you can actually, what's cool is that you can actually feel it. There's a lot of immediate gratification with that. Then the very next day you wake up and it's like you just kind of see the world a little differently, more open. It's hard to describe it. That's the best way I can describe it.
I think you get an aha. And I think if you've done therapy or if you've done meditation, for a long enough period, you've had at least one or two ahas. So you know what that feeling is when something clicks. Mm-hmm. So to see that in a psychedelic sense, it's really fascinating because you realize there's like a sentence, you could either do 20 minutes of meditation a day or 20 minutes of mushrooms. Once every 6 months. But
pretty much.
It basically, you really have this click. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be right to not communicate that these are still serious medications. And so what happens when you open that box, a lot of times people have really positive experiences, and they see things in a way that like, wow, this is different and this is unique, and it helps them, and it's very healing. Mm-hmm. And it's always a really healing opportunity, and they're very safe. But because we are dealing with the brain, it can also unlock trauma, and it can bring things to the surface that you've forgotten, repressed memories.
And you have to be ready to be able to account for those things, work on them, talk through them. So that's what we were talking about before, how we think that it's really helpful to have a handful of these therapies with you, ready to go. So like if okay, I'm doing a deep dive, I'm going to go and do the ketamine therapy or the mushroom therapy or what psychedelic, then I'm going to have resources around me. I'm going to set myself up for success. And as once the therapy session is over, the therapy session is what I call theatrics. Mm-hmm. When you see the things, they call it a trip or whatever, and the visual things come up in your mind, and during that, hour, period, it's kind of like working on a TV while it's on. Yeah. You see different colors and you see different things, but what's important is how does the TV look once you're done working on it, like the next day, right. So that's what I really focus on. So during the next day, you have these things that have been kind of unearthed, and some of them are straightforward, like a snake. Okay, well, yeah, actually it's not that bad. I don't know why I was ever afraid of it before. But then others might like trauma, like true trauma, PTSD, or like, what have you. So like those things you have to be able to, they're open and they're sitting on the table now, right in front of you. Yeah. And you have to have some tools to process things, in the correct way. And then your brain can have the opportunity to look at it in its best case. So we call it kind of setting yourself up for success.
I'm a big advocate for, and this is also what the research shows, but psychedelic therapy along with talk therapy or CBT is sort of, and if you can do meditation too, if you can do that, that's the holy trinity. But particularly psychedelic therapy with talk therapy is the great duo of the superhero team, the Batman and Robin of mental health. Like those two go so well together. And I have a personal experience when I did psilocybin, it unlocked a lot of traumas that I actually didn't even remember. And that's the funny thing is we with things that are really heavy, the brain will put it in a box, and this is something that is well known. I mean, people talk about this who have been through sexual abuse. They talk about how they don't remember. The brain will just put it in a box, put it somewhere, because it's like if I see that, I will not function. Mm-hmm. And so I had a psilocybin experience that unearthed a lot of memories that were stored, and I decided to do talk therapy along with that, which I hadn't done in a while.
Just to throw this in, what's interesting is that typically those are experiences that have not been accounted for and really worked through.
Right.
They were just swept under the rug. The ones that have been worked through, they're fine. They're not attached to a really intense emotion anymore. Yeah. And it goes into a different box in brain processing.
Well,
once you work through it,
it's weird. It felt like someone coming into your house, pulling out the worst stuff, and saying, "Just so you know, none of this was your fault." And then you come out of this trip and you're like, "Oh!" and it breaks you in half because you're like, "Well, but what do I do with it?" Okay, this horrible thing happened that I repressed, and I guess I understand that it's not my fault, but it's still awful. Yeah. What do I do with this? And so it can happen. You can have these really amazing breakthroughs, but you can also have things surface. So I think it's really important to have a resource and have a support system set up so that what am I even going in to do this for? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know what resources are available, because sometimes it's more casual and you might stumble on something that is heavier that you say, oh, okay. I was doing this just for some general stuff, and I just remembered this really intense thing, and so I got to go somewhere where I can talk through that, or I gotta journal through that, or I've got to do something with that. I didn't expect that. I was sweeping under the rug and found a lot of dirt.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm a suppressor. I know by nature I suppress.
I don't even
want
to look under that rug.
So yeah, I know.
Sweep it under. Yep. The rug's up here.
Just walk around it. So we talked about some of the different forms, the different medications. We kind of touched base on those. Anything else about ketamine that you want to mention?
No, I think so. Ketamine comes in a few different forms. There's a sublingual form. There's a nasal form. The nasal form does not really have as much positive science. I mean, it's fine, but they really see that you need a therapeutic dose to really get the brain to shut down and really start to uncoil those neural networks.
Yeah.
There's an intravenous, which you can go into a clinic and you'll be supervised, and they will inject ketamine into your veins, and you'll kind of go basically out for about an hour. Same sort of ordeal. I think of the different things that I've done, ketamine is the one that I think is the most functional, because
straightforward.
It's tangible in a way that can be applicable in your life. I mean, psilocybin lasts like 8 hours. DMT lasts like 12 hours. LSD lasts 12 hours. They have huge positive implications. LSD for addiction, I mean, the research is impressive. I think I told you that the founder of AA.
Yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how he got off of alcohol.
Super alcoholic who had an LSD trip, and that's.
I wonder how come that wasn't in one of the 10 steps.
It's not in any of the steps.
It wasn't in any of the 10 steps.
It's the 11th step. It's in the special edition book. But yeah, I mean, the addiction research on LSD is incredible. But the reality is that those are real commitments. I mean, 12 hours. Now, ketamine is an hour, and of all of the different things, it's the least likely to cause some sort of a scary episode, because it's relatively short, and it's a dissociative. So, when you talk about people that talk about bad trips, it's rare that you're gonna have like a bad ketamine trip, because for the most part you're just kind of like going under general anesthesia. You're kind of just but turning into a puddle.
Well, one of the things that we talk about too, like when I said setting yourself up for success, whenever you have to do something like that, let's say you did want to go do a ketamine session, with the sublingual, that we call them a troche.
Yeah.
It's like a little Jolly Rancher that you put under your tongue, and it absorbs in the
salivary glands.
Yeah, the glands and the blood vessels under your tongue. So so there's a huge difference between taking the exact same dosage of medication and just, it's busy, you've been stressed out all day, and it's like, I'm just going to plop on the couch and take one of these. Yeah. Like you're not really going to get much out of it, because the whole point is that it's a dissociative anesthetic. So it's pulling you away from your brain, in a sense, and if you're heavily stimulated, you had a lot of caffeine, you happen to take like Adderall or something like that, other stimulants in your body, even phentermine, like other like different stimulants pre-workout, like your brain is going to fight that more. And then if it doesn't dissociate, then it can't really do its whole job. But if you kind of set things up for a really positive like meditation, so like you take a bath, you maybe have some music playing, there's different types of psychedelic music, which is really cool to get into. Get something to eat, make sure that the whole house is quiet, or you're in a quiet place or something. And in the evening you set everything up, and then it's a completely different experience, because you're prepping your brain for success to have that thing undergone. So that's why, just because of how much of a distinctive difference that is, like when I go into like a medical office or something, nothing against the IV therapy, but the IV therapy sessions are in a pretty typical medical office, which is very sterile, very white and bright. And like, it's not like, as like relaxing as like home would be, where your body can just kind of let go. Like if you've ever like, I don't know if I could even like, I don't know if I could even fall asleep like at a medical office like that, like because
it's too stimulating.
It's too stimulating. You're not at home. So the ability to disassociate requires a higher dose in the ketamine. So then you need that. So, but in reality, like it's not. You don't have to have all that if you set yourself up for success.
Well, and it's interesting because the ritual of setting yourself up for whatever that is with ketamine, it's like that with all psychedelics. That's why when you go to like
with therapy, with the meditation, like the same thing.
yeah, with all of the psychedelics, there's always a setup, and it's based on the scale of the psychedelic. So like with ayahuasca or with psilocybin, there's a whole retreat, and that's because this isn't going to be an hour. This is going to be 8 hours. And there's a whole preparation period before that. And there's a whole discussion about what you're going to experience and what you're going to do so that you can kind of prepare yourself for this journey so that you're not in it and having a negative experience, so that this is what you'll experience. This is what you could see. This is how your body can feel, so that you don't panic when these things happen.
Yeah.
And you get a chance to sort of get your mind in a state where it's ready to do these things.
Exactly.
Is really fascinating. Like in my time doing ketamine therapy, it's really interesting because the first time you take the troche and you're in Neptune, it kind of just yanks you out of your body because your brain will go with things when it's a totally new experience a little bit easier. What I've seen is that actually having really successful longer term therapy with these sort of psychedelics requires you to understand that there's a dance, because you can totally take a full sublingual troche and be totally present and just really heavy. Like your body's just, you're like, oh, I feel like I'm awake on an operating table.
Yeah, it's like stimulating your brain out of the fog, and you can still get up and talk. And now I wouldn't drive a car, but still, like you can clear yourself out of that, and you can fall back in if you want to. But that's going to impact, your effectiveness of the whole therapy. Yeah, which is really interesting. But yeah, those are the medications. You mentioned earlier about legalization. So there's been a whole wave. I know you've been following the legalization of these psychedelics very closely. Tell us about that.
So there's an organization called MAPS. It's the Multidisciplinary Association
for Psychedelic
Studies. There we go, MAPS. So MAPS is sort of the big lobbyist that's sort of helped to push this science forward and help us finally get into an era where research can happen again, because I think all of these psychedelics, with the exception of ketamine, because it's part of general anesthetic, but all of them were criminalized. And LSD is one of the ones that I find most fascinating. Because
not legitimately so either.
No,
like they were going back in history, like you said, there were campaigns literally built around like false campanes.
Yeah,
built
there's
around,
disinformation campaigns about your kids are going to burn out.
Yeah.
My favorite, which I told one of my closest friends, is you'll get high and you'll never come down. He said, "Well, that sounds like a huge savings to me."
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Is that the worst? It's gonna save me so much money. But no, like and before that period, there was actually an earlier section of research that was being done into psychedelics for healing.
Before anybody knew anything about them,
yeah.
In modern Western world.
Well, mushroom picking was like a thing. People go out and they'd harvest the mushrooms and they'd trip all summer. And this, the whole total, like the love, 70s, 80s, that whole chapter.
Yeah, Woodstock.
Woodstock. And so then the disinformation campaign started, and they were aggressive, they were heavy. The U.S. lobbied to get these things put on schedules with the UN so that they were made illegal around the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to start the revolution, but I do think that as we look at this and we realize that there was viable research, we have to account now for the 30-some years of people who have suffered or died to suicides or other mental health ailments that could have actually been helped with these medications that we actually knew were effective. But for political reasons, were criminalized.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we have to answer for. And I think the only way we can answer for that is by being more scrupulous with how we look at our politics and how we look at what is happening in politics. And I think it's interesting. Utah legalized psilocybin, and I think it was psilocybin, like a month ago. And they kind of did it on a weird weekend. They sort of like snuck it through. They were like, let's just do this when no one's looking, And I think that's fine, but I do think we need to be mindful of watching what's happening in our politics. And that's a whole different thing, but I just think it's important because that's how we can account for the time that these things could have been here. So from the criminal side of it, one of the interesting things about LSD, which is one of the earliest ones that I don't think will have a real hope for legalization for a little bit, because it had probably the most effective disinformation campaign.
Yeah.
Was used initially and was initially funded for research as a bioweapon by the CIA to see what we could do to use this to dose people and see how soldiers and how agents reacted when they were dosed with a drug without knowing what it was.
And that's how they actually tested it.
They tested it. There's actually
without them knowing.
This is a crazy thing. This is a true story. They spiked the punch at the Christmas party of the CIA Christmas party with all the agents with LSD.
Wow.
To research how they reacted when they were dosed without knowing what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they tested this on I want to say prisoners. I want to say it was prisoners. A few other
How do you
civilians.
explain that, though? Like, how do you explain that
to
the wife? Like, it's like, honey, I got to tell you, like, went a little crazy at the Christmas party. I don't know what happened. How do you?
Well, literally, you went a little. But this is what's wild is, it got the status of psychotic. Yeah. Because if you were given a dissociative medication that's also hallucinogen without knowing it.
Sweetheart, the CIA is running an experiment on all of us, and they put LSD inside the punch. Like, show me the look that most wives would give their husband. Really?
That's the excuse you're going with?
Yeah.
Chuck.
Really?
But no, I mean, you think about it, and so, when we do research, we have to do, we do double-blind studies. There's a specific set of parameters that we use to document something. LSD was categorized as psychotic because people were reporting psychotic episodes because they were dosed without knowing they were dosed with anything. Which, of course, you would think it was psychosis.
Yeah.
I mean, the ceiling is melting. And if you don't know anything is going on, and all of a sudden the world starts moving, you would think you were having a psychotic episode. And that was how they established that this medication actually causes psychosis. It's psychotic. Even though that's sort of the branch where we kind of saw that when people sort of experimented with psychedelics without, too many parameters, there is more room for negative experiences. Whereas when people were briefed,
and they set themselves up for success.
They had massive breakthroughs. And that's been sort of the other side of this is there's a lot of research that says psychedelics plus therapy or psychedelics plus coaching, really, really good. Psychedelics in the punch, not your best friend.
I can't even imagine taking a psychedelic, and I know this happens, but still taking a psychedelic with music and lights and stimulation and so I can't even
I can imagine because I've experienced it's not a great thing.
It's not. I can't imagine it would be anywhere similar. But the point is that we have to be vigilant. We have to use our own head on our shoulders and research things independently, and look for the good and the bad and the ugly. And a lot of this stuff, some of it is bad, some of it is warranted, some of it's not. But just to have this, Mr. Mackey, like ideology on it. Drugs are bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Drugs are bad. Like that. That's it's not very scientific. We have to piece it together.
I love the way you put that. It's not very scientific.
Oh, you like South Park?
I do. But you know what? There's a really cool thing. I think it's called Good Trip. And it's a documentary on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. It's called Good Trip, and Deepak Chopra is in it, and like a few other people are in it, and it really kind of unravels this whole idea, which is really cool for somebody that's sort of like, okay, I think I want to experiment with this. I know I could really benefit from it, but we're all to some extent victims of that disinformation. Disinformation travels with us for generations. Like I talked to my mom about this, and she was like, no, but like it'll melt your brain, and I was like, that's not very scientific.
Yeah, but I mean, if you've seen 2,000 commercials where they crack an egg and fry it, that's your brain on drugs. And that's it. That's it. That's all the science you get.
That's a good peer-reviewed study right there.
But those things stick with us, and that's, I'm not saying that, everybody should go and take all drugs. I'm not saying that, but we have to use judgment because the things that we call drugs now, or the thing that, might end up being something really worthwhile or healing to someone else, with something else like later on.
Well, and we're in an information era. We're in an era of exploration. And so it's a really cool time, and there's a lot of resources. I think one of the things that's really important, go check out maps.org. There's a lot of really interesting research if you want to learn more about psychedelics. This is a great sort of like wetting your fingertips, but as always, we encourage, do your research, do your homework, just not just with this. We always say that even in the main clinic, look and ask questions. Ask questions.
Absolutely.
Curiosity did not kill the cat. The cat is alive. The cat is great.
Yeah.
The cat just came out of a ketamine trip. It's emotionally happy.
It's unlocked. He's ready to go.
The performance is great. Diet is clean. Cat's doing fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lack of curiosity is what will kill the cat.
Yeah, definitely ask. And if you are in front of a clinician, you're asking questions and you don't feel comfortable with the type of answers you're getting, they don't have a way to break it down to you or your layman's terms, then you're probably not in the right place. I hate to say that, but it's true. There's plenty of resources out there. Obviously we're here. You can always connect with us at our clinic, which is great. We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, this stuff is important, and it's worth all of these tools. I think are really worthwhile to look at and wrap our minds around.
If you are looking into ketamine therapy, we're obviously a resource. You can always reach out just for questions in general. I always think it's important, just like with our main clinic, that this stuff always has a good and a bad side to it. We're still living in an industrial society, and so this is still a business. So there's a lot of places where they're just going to give you the drugs, and so you want to make sure, if there's nothing else that we impart, I think you want to make sure that you set yourself up for success with information about
due
what
diligence.
to expect. Do your due diligence so that you know how to make sure that you get what you want to get out of those experiences, because most of these places will just they function as a medication dispensary, and these are psychedelics. So you need a little bit more parameters than just, to run home with the pack of troches and knock yourself out, Take time to do the due diligence, ask the questions, and set yourself up for success, because that's when you get the best benefits out of it. And that's when you get the neuroplasticity, and it's a positive experience for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you imagine walking through a week without any old past triggers?
I think that happens when you die.
Or traumas.
I think that's after death.
Well, I mean, if you could just go 1 week and just leave all that stuff at home and just not have to I just think that's.
I think
how much clearer and sharper will we be able to think and process?
Well, you have room to innovate. You have room to create.
Yeah.
I think for me that self-exploration has always been an interest point, and so that's why psychedelic medications have been a really fascinating thing for me, because they've allowed me. I was fine, but they've allowed me to see the difference between being fine and having the ability to thrive in your life and invest in your life, So I think that's the big thing. That's neuroplasticity. So listen, check it out, look into it, do your homework, ask us questions. We're here. We're always here as a resource.
And we'll have more videos.
Because
this is a great topic that we obviously really enjoy. I mean, we could literally do a whole podcast on each and every little snippet of what we talked about. We're just kind of touching base on, we're just highlighting some of the main topics, but there's a ton. We love this stuff.
Yeah. So listen, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Living 360. As always, we're going to come back, have plenty of new topics. We're going to have lots of different things that we discussed. This episode is on neuroplasticity, obviously with a focus on psychedelic medications. So check out maps.org. Check out Good Trip on Netflix. Do some homework on ketamine therapy. If it's something that you think is interesting. If you have questions, you can always reach out to us at the clinic. You can shoot us an email at info@360health or 360hrt.com. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely.